put our time and energy, and it really is a Zen-like harmony that they live in. So we wanted it to be a utopia, and then we wanted it to be something that was cold and then turned into something that was very warm. When I think of sci-fi films, which I'm not a big sci-fi guy, but when I think of them, sometimes I think of them as being very cold, and I really wanted to make something that was ultimately very warm and very soulful.
When you think about the warmth that you wanted to inject into this movie, if I read correctly, you put a lot of like blue tones into the frames until you start really focusing on them as they fall in love with each other. When you think of like coldness in science fiction, could you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I mean more in human connection form. The way that humans interact with each other, and to me, I just kind of wanted to slowly burn that away and turn that on its head, and ultimately lose all of that. So by the end, when they're on the train, it's not a science fiction movie at all. It's just a human story about two people that go all in on each other no matter what. And to me, that's a metaphor for a long-term relationship, which is what the movie's about.
You directed most of the stories that you've told in film form have involved relationships, very like all the like nuts and bolts and the warts and all aspects of like falling in love and what people are willing to do for it. Can you talk a little bit about why that fascinates you so much? Like, why are you so drawn to stories about people who must endure extreme difficulties to try to be together, sometimes successfully and often very not?
Oh gosh, well I think I want to devote my life to it because I feel like it's something that I'm so curious about, and I continue to have questions about that I'll never answer.
Right.
So I feel like every film I'm asking a question that I'm never getting the answer to. So I need to make another film, and then ask a question, and then another one. So
what was the question you were trying to ask in this
I was, really trying to question the beginning of a relationship when you fall in love, and it's amazing and it's wonderful. And then years down the road, when things have changed, and you've changed as people and developed and grown, when you look back on the relationship and why you're there and why it's important to be with that person, you realize why you're in that relationship. So to me, it was just looking back on a long-term relationship.
And I find that observation interesting. Obviously at the end of this film, he has gone and had the treatment to cure SOS. He comes back to the apartment and she's like, "What the hell?" And he's like, "I thought you were dead." And
that's exactly what they said.
Yeah. Photographic no. Well, the funny thing about that though is in a different movie, you would almost expect that to just be like the end,
Yeah.
You are very much going for this like Romeo and Juliet sort of vibe, star-crossed lovers and all that. But instead, he resolves to just tough it out. Like he's just going to try to maybe get it back. Can you talk a little bit about how you and your screenwriter, Nathan Parker, came to that as your conclusion for the film?
Yeah, I really believe that Silas's spirit would eventually win. To me, that's the most optimistic ending of all my movies by far. The other endings are really not optimistic, I think, but sometimes people think that they are. But this one, I think, really is. I think this one is filled with hope. And I think there's something really beautiful in the idea that no matter what, he's not going to give up, even though he knows he doesn't feel it. He knows that he did, and that he wants to again for her, because it means so much to her.
I think about the conversation when he goes to the support group for the first time, and they're talking at length about like their various experiences and whether it can be transmitted through top contact. And one of the people in the support group straight up is like, emotions provoke other emotions, but the society at large has decided, or is insisting, as far as we know, it can't be spread. When you were imagining this, were you firmly on the side of like emotions evoke emotions, or is it random and I'm just thinking too nerdily about this?
No, I think it is that way. I think essentially Kristen's character turns on Silas's character. Yeah. The fact that she can feel in her energy and chemicals and pheromones and stuff that's in the air essentially grab him and pull his magnets towards her. Yeah. So I think when I think of the beginning of the film, I think that Silas switches on because of Nia and Nia's need and desire that she doesn't know that she has in her, that she provokes Silas to give her.
Sorry about this pun, but speaking of turning people on, I apologize for that. The scenes between them when they're alone in his apartment or when they're alone in the bathroom are very intimate. The thing that really struck me is, for me at least, the sexiest part about them isn't the close-ups on various vague body parts, but it's that, let me preface the question this way, relationships are full of a lot of mundane bullshit. You're just like, oh, their eyes are so blue, and oh, you like that book? That's my favorite book. And when you describe it to someone, it sounds ridiculous, which is maybe part of why we always invent these dumb, epic love stories for why we got with someone. But you focus on them, like, what were you like as a kid? Were you always tall? Very mundane. You made it very sexy, at the risk of coming on too strong to you. Could you talk?
Anytime.
Yeah. Well.
Ring a ding ding.
We met on Tinder before this, by the way. Well, could you talk a little bit about how you approach that scene? Because that's something that a lot of people try to do and they fail miserably.
Well, that's improvised. That's really Nick and Kristen talking. Nick really was a round kid and the freckles and all that stuff. I mean, we were just rolling in between takes in the scene, and I ended up using it in the movie. I mean, there's a bunch of improv in the movie. I love moments where you shoot prior to action and after cut. You get these really interesting moments where their guards are down, and that's just them talking. So to me, that's mostly what I used. It was just really honest and intimate and real between the two of them.
Did that moment and those kinds of improvisations come out of the way you guys prepped for this film? If I'm not mistaken, before you even read through the script, you just spent a week together being intimate. Can you talk for them a little bit about that and whether that played into that moment?
Yeah, I mean, the rehearsal process consisted mainly of exercises that we did for a week in Japan. We shot the movie in Japan, so we were just in a hotel room in Tokyo, me, Nick, and Kristen, and we were doing exercises to try to build me and Silas from scratch and try to remove all the shit that we have in our heads and in our hearts and just start over, and we built it from there. So we didn't really do a lot of the scenes in rehearsal. We waited till we were on set so we could explore them, so they weren't just an execution, they were an exploration. But we just did a lot of exercises, a lot of eating Japanese food and talking about love and life and our relationships, and then we just blended that into the movie.
When I think about Silas as he wakens, his emotions reassert themselves, and he immediately fixates on her and gets back to what you were saying about how her pheromones and her emotions triggered his. He behaves very obsessively. In a different movie, he would be arrested and it would end with what part of 20 yards away at all times, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the decision to make his initial advances towards her have that air of, menace is not the right word, but
yeah, it's borderline. I mean, essentially to me, he's a child. I mean, he's a 4-year-old that just realized what Reese's Pieces are or something. I mean, it's just something that he never realized existed, and he's trying to deal with the complexities of what he's feeling, and he doesn't know what to do other than to just luxuriate in that feeling and enjoy it. So yeah, but I mean, yeah.
Well, when she, on the other hand, plays it, and it actually ties into something that also struck me. They have a secret. Some of you in this room may have had an affair or a relationship you had to keep secret. Some of you may have just lied on a test and someone found out about it. But it's an interesting moment where she's doing that thing where she really wants to hook up with him. She really wants this to happen. But it's wrong. Well, maybe just this once. Can you talk a little bit about that and how her character is basically, it feels like she's talking herself into doing the things she already wants to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's scary to think that everything could be taken away from them. And, at a certain point, you can't choose who you love, and how you feel, so she kind of is forced to give in because she can't resist anymore. So I think that push-pull is, really what a large portion of that middle is.
This is something, I apologize, the nerdiest possible question, but something that occurred to me, are these characters virgins when they hook it up? What's sex life in this society?
I think Nick and Kristen are still virgins now, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Yes, they are.
Yeah. That's interesting how, because you understate in a very interesting way. This could have been a good opportunity for just literally balls to the wall kind of sex scenes or whatever, and you're very circumspect in how you film those shots. And it could have been something, did you ever see the Pacific miniseries on HBO? The miniseries The Pacific?
No, I didn't.
There's a scene where the main character one of the main characters hasn't had sex in years, probably, maybe he is a virgin. It's the shortest sex scene ever. And you avoid all those kinds of moments in this. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to sex in a story like this?
Yeah, I mean, to me it wasn't really about body parts melting together. I mean, it was about souls melting together. So to me, there are some sex scenes in the movie that are soul sex scenes where essentially their spirits come together, and that's what I was more interested in.
I'm curious, trying to figure out how to phrase this. Sorry, everyone. I'm apparently having a stroke. No, I'm fine. I mean, call my parents if I die. No, the various things that they go through together as a couple. You know, they're at one point they're barely trying not to touch each other. They walk past each other with a little secret. They let their hands almost touch. They're just reveling in the sense of being near each other. When you think about relationships generally, and you talked about this a lot, this, like you said, is the first time that's very optimistic, and that optimism seems to come in just a reveling in the presence of the person that you love. The previous movies have explored that. I'm thinking of the other movie you did with Guy Pearce, actually, where very similar sort of themes happen, but it goes almost disastrously wrong. Do you consider yourself a romantic, or do you consider yourself a cynic when it comes to matters relationships?
No, I think romantic. I mean, I'm excited by the idea of people finding each other that need and want to find each other. So, you know, yeah.
Like me and you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's true, everybody. Before we turn this over, I'm going to give people in the crowd a chance to ask some questions, but I want to talk about the soundtrack, which I love. And a couple of questions about that. The first would be, you know, because you understate the sex scenes, if they can even call them sex scenes, and you focus, I think, beautifully on these very mundane moments. And the only place where the movie really just gets like aggressive, and where, you know, emotionally aggressive, is in the soundtrack. And it's an interesting contrast because at least personally, I don't feel like there's ever a moment where the soundtrack is telling me how to feel. It's reflecting like this bursting inside, at least for me. You know, when you love someone, you want to just hug them all the time. But that's a hard thing to get right. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to work with Sasha Ring and Dustin O'Halloran, who wrote the score together? How did you select them, and how did you guys come to determine that level of bombast?
Yeah. Well, I love music so much. To me, it starts the process. Like, I was listening to Sasha's music before we even had a screenplay, and that was very much so like the movie to me. So I would give it to Nick and Kristen and to my crew, and you know, that's how I could explain the tone and the world and the ethereal nature of it. And I really wanted to work with Sasha, and I'd worked with Dustin before, so I really wanted to create a soundtrack that was almost like sound design, essentially, that you know, didn't feel musical per se, but felt like it was a part of the atmosphere and it was in the air. So yeah, I mean, that was sort of the idea. But we were playing music on set, playing a lot of that music during the scenes. It was really instrumental in conveying the tone. How many tracks did they submit to you before you finally decided these are what's making it into the movie and these aren't? Well, I mean, we have hundreds of tracks, you know, demos and things. I mean, it was just awesome to listen to all that really cool music that just kept coming in every day.
Can I have a mixtape?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, I'll probably have a follow-up question before we bring it to an end, but I'd like to give the audience the chance to ask. If anyone has any questions you'd like to ask, come forward and I'll hand this mic to you. Maybe it'd be easiest if you kind of came around this way. And I'll meet you over here just to be polite.